Today, I'd like to welcome Gabby Bernstein on the show. She's a #1 New York Times bestselling author and has written 9 books, including her most recent, which we'll talk about today, Happy Days. Gabby was featured on Oprah's Super Soul Sunday and co-hosted the Guinness World Record's largest guided meditation with Deepak Chopra. She appears regularly as an expert on Today and Good Morning America, among other places, like the How We Can Heal podcast. She connects with her community through her books, her Miracle membership, and her podcast, Dear Gabby. To learn more about Gabby, visit gabbybernstein.com. I fell in love with Gabby's work when we met in San Francisco years ago, and I asked her advice on how to get started writing my first book. She encouraged me to write a clear outline. I took her advice, and it served me well. I'm so excited to share more wisdom with you here, so let's go ahead and get started. Hello, and welcome to the How We Can Heal podcast. My name is Lisa Danylchuk, and I created this podcast to share deep conversations that encourage us to move through life's toughest circumstances. Let's get talking about how we can heal. Gabby!
You did it.
I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank
you so much for coming on the show.
Listen, thank you. I am so grateful to you beautiful souls who are here to support me in fulfilling my mission of sharing this message in this book out into the world. And thank you.
Yeah, and I'm gonna thank you right back again for writing this book. There's so many important things happening here on so many levels, and I think it's such a huge opportunity for healing. I'm assuming for you, but also for anyone who reads it. There's a lot of things I want to get into about what I appreciated about the book, and I'm super curious about your journey writing it and sharing it. So let's dive in. But yay, I love it so much. I just loved reading it. So for folks who haven't read it yet, this book you share about your personal experience with childhood trauma, but you share it in a way that's really educational. It's really supportive. So I'm just wondering, as you went through this journey of recovering a memory of abuse early in your life, what surprised you about that? You had already been a spiritual teacher for decades at this point. And all of a sudden, I'm imagining it would kind of rock your world. What was that like?
It rocked my world, but it was also great relief because my career began really when I got sober at 25. And I got clean and sober off of cocaine and alcohol, particularly cocaine. And I got very spiritual and really started teaching the methods. And it was such a beautiful change in my life and a commitment that I made to myself and to the world. But all the while, I started picking up other addictions like workaholism and codependency and controlling. And I was living in a lot of anxiety that I didn't even realize because I was constantly meditating to feel better or just really became a spirit junkie.
Yeah.
That helped me very much as a form of protecting me from feeling deeper feelings. But by the time I was 36, I couldn't go on anymore with all that stress and that hypervigilance. And I would always ask myself, like, why am I why was I a cocaine addict? Why am I a workaholic? Why?
Yeah.
And even after having at that stage in my life authored half a dozen books or more, been on Oprah, had done beautiful work in the world that I was really proud of, felt really connected and committed to that work, I was still really suffering internally. And that suffering just kind of got worse and worse. And then when I was 36 in 2016, I had a dream. And in the dream, I remembered being sexually abused as a child.
Wow.
And that was a way that memory was resurfaced for me. And that was terrifying. It rocked me, as you said, it shook me deeply, but it also gave me great relief in knowing why.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense and it fits.
This is what I've been running from.
And I have to say, I've heard different iterations of this type of experience where people are like, why am I behaving in this way? Why do I have this relationship with alcohol or with substances or with other things in life? What's driving it? And it's so interesting because you don't know until you know, right? Like you're wondering, and I love what you say in your book, becoming brave enough to wonder and sit with why is this, why am I behaving this way? What's happening? But there's something under the surface. And really what explains that is dissociation, which is something I think even in the world of mental health and trauma-informed care, people are just really trying to get a grasp of. And it's a difficult thing to understand. I think you understand it best if you've been through it, right? You go, oh, that's how that works. So I so appreciate in this book that you speak from that place and can educate people from that place. But I'm curious, how did you learn about dissociation? How did you put that together that that's what was happening?
Well, God is good. And
She's
of
great.
yeah, the year
They're great.
before my memory, I had a dinner with a very close girlfriend who told me the same story that I hadn't experienced yet. And I was like, holy shit, that's crazy. And I couldn't even believe that that could happen. Like, how could you just remember a memory?
Yeah.
And that was really beautiful because it was really God setting me up to, one, kind of know that this could happen and not be like totally unaware of what this could be. And two, to know who to call when it happened.
Yeah.
But the beautiful thing about dissociation is that when we are in such extreme terror, the brain has the ability to just shut it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Uh, the sad truth about dissociation is that while you may not remember in your conscious awareness, your unconscious awareness, your body, your nervous system remembers it every fucking day.
Every day.
And my therapist said to me once, your trauma shows up in the way you brush your teeth.
Wow. I love that.
And the thing that I want to acknowledge is that I didn't know the why, and because I didn't know, that was another layer of this.
Yeah.
But I think every single human has trauma,
Absolutely.
T or small t. We've just lived through 2 years of a worldwide pandemic that's a global trauma. And many of our unresolved, ignored, pushed down, shunned traumas from our childhood, big or small t traumas. Small t trauma could be being bullied or being told you're stupid. A big T trauma is being sexually abused or living through a catastrophic event or having an alcoholic parent. And when we have these unresolved wounds from our past, which we all have, no matter how good your childhood was, and we have them even into adulthood. But when we have these unresolved, truncated energy and emotion that's stuck in our nervous system, and then we experience a global pandemic and things start
Mm-hmm.
to feel out of control and unsafe, the coping mechanisms that we've used are throughout our life become extreme, very extreme, because we got to work a lot harder to push down those feelings.
Oh, we can't distract. And if our go-to is the hyper arousal and we're used to just running around to not feel and brushing our teeth really fast or not at all and moving through life and not breathing or thinking, well, all of a sudden you got to stay in your house and you don't have anywhere to go. So are you going to work all day on the computer or how are you going to manage
You're stuck.
that?
Yeah. Or if the way you numb out is, I once worked with a woman who, her way of running and protecting. So I practice IFS therapy, or not, I practice it not as a therapist, but I'm trained in it and I practice it every day when I work with people in my podcast and in this book. And internal family systems therapy has this premise that we are we have these exiled child parts that I mentioned that get locked up under lock and key and they're never spoken of. And
Mhm.
then we build up these protection mechanisms, otherwise known in IFS as protector parts.
Yeah.
Those protector parts are dissociation, addiction, control, running, and hypervigilance. We use these repetitive, often known as negative patterns, but really they're protector parts to silence that suffering and that fear from that child part. And
Yep.
so when we were, told to stay home, I was saying that I worked once with this woman whose one of her protectors was to just lie on the couch all day.
Hmm.
And when you don't have to get up to go to work anymore and you don't have to show up in the office, that protector can get really extreme.
Right. And that's the hypo, right? That's the hypo aroused state of just being not feeling heavy, feeling frozen, unable to function or connect, checked out. And I think it's important to note that like being hyper aroused or hypo-aroused, being anxious or depressed, like we use those words a lot in mental health and in the general public. I hear that as like, you have a nervous system. Congratulations. It's on high or it's on low. It's on hot or it's on cold. And if we can understand how that connects to our experiences of trauma, well, then we can start to heal. And you did, I really appreciate about IFS that it brings in this perspective of parts can hold things, right? Because that can be, in like really extreme cases of abuse, like ritual abuse and things like that, commercial sexual abuse, it can become dissociative identity, right? Where there's different parts of self, different names, switching that occurs. And so I really appreciate that IFS, and in your book, you talk about a lot of different modalities that help you get that aspect of, hey, there was a piece that was just not missing, but over there until I became brave enough to wonder, why am I behaving this way, and what's in there?
Yeah.
So what are some of the other tools? I know you mentioned tapping and IFS, and what do you feel like was your recipe for healing in terms of your therapeutic modalities?
That's such a nice way to put it. This book definitely is my recipe. And like any recipe, you can follow it or you can test drive your own way. It's not that you have to follow the exact methods. Not like baking. I could never write a baking recipe.
I'm the same way. Like a little bit of this, a little bit of that looks good to me.
Creative, yeah. So but this is my journey. And through my journey, I teach the reader how they can apply these principles in real time and also where to go to find more.
Yeah.
And so my journey really started with 12-step recovery and deep spiritual practice. I've come to understand that for a while, I think that my spiritual practice was even another form of protection. It was another protector.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, as Dick Schwartz, who generously wrote the foreword for this book and is a great friend of mine, new friend, but good friend. And I love him for his ability to channel internal family systems into this world. He says, and he's really got a very big antenna up for spiritual bypassing.
Mm-hmm. Good.
In conversations with Dick, I've been able to really see that protector, that spiritual bypassing, particularly with specific types of yoga where you can kind of like get higher than the pain.
Yeah.
While that's a lot better than alcoholism,
sure,
it's still a form of running.
Yeah.
And managing, because protectors are often also called managers.
Yeah.
So managing those feelings of anxiety or impermissible rage or shame, guilt.
Yeah.
And so for a while I used that spiritual practice. But the thing I really have to be very gentle about how I speak about my spiritual practice because it saved me.
Yeah.
And I can look back and say, yeah, there were times where it might have been extreme because that's all I had to get above the pain. But it was life-saving and continue. And it also is my spiritual practice that is the thread within the entire journey that I've been on.
Right.
Because I also believe that we have spirit guides. And I believe that the energy of the universe is the same as self energy, as Dick would say in IFS. And so self energy is that part of ourselves that is creative and courageous and calm and compassionate. And I would always have known that part from a spiritual perspective as a higher self or an inner guidance system. Mm-hmm. And so call it what you want to call it, just call upon it. Exactly. And the goal of a lot of these practices that I have found were really about settling and calming those protector mechanisms so that you could get closer to that presence of self within you. Mm-hmm. And really connecting to self to relax those protections, to relax the protectors. The other methods that I get into in the book are EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a profound practice that stimulates both sides of the brain through buzzers or into different ears. And again, a spiritual therapeutic practice, in my opinion.
Yes. And
it opens up the brain's window of tolerance to reprocess these old disturbances. And it's so gentle and it's so safe, particularly if you do it with a therapist that you really trust. And there's ways I introduce it for the reader in real time as well, because there's a practice that I put in the book called Rage on the Page.
Yeah, I like that one.
Its origins are with the John Sarno work, really under the premise that or physical conditions are often psychosomatic.
Better out than in.
Exactly, exactly. And so what I did there was I took this practice that my friend Nicole Sachs adapted from Sarno, and she called it journal speak, where you journal for 20 minutes and then you meditate for 20 minutes. And in the journaling, you just get it all out. You just put it on the page. I took it a little further and I added in the EMDR music. So I merged the EMDR part with this practice. And so I put in bilateral music. So the music would stimulate either side of my brain with like a little tone in the right and the tone in the left and back and forth. And while I used that, I would journal, and get all my rage on the page, followed by deep meditation with the music, which would then reprocess those disturbed feelings and even far back memories or present moment experiences that were reflective of those historical stories.
Yeah.
And that works really well for me. The thing I do say in the book, though, is if rage on the page is too overwhelming for your system,
Yes,
just do anxiety on the page, or just, anything on the page.
get it out.
You many people can't touch into their rage quite yet.
An important piece there is you had support, you had experience, and I'm assuming, you did resourcing as part of your EMDR. I think there are times where people go, oh, EMDR is great, just like any tool. And then I'm going to go do it with the most painful memory ever. And something I really appreciate about your book is you're like, don't push yourself too hard. Just go a little bit, take it bit by bit. And I think that's some wisdom, you learn as a trauma therapist, one way or another, right? Someone tells you, or you figure it out that, oh, we really need to bite off and chew little bits and pace this.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated that you emphasized that in the book. I'm curious, so you have been processing this massive, recovered memory and all the implications of that, which I think are like so much more than you could even really communicate in a book. I mean, the reality of that day to day is just massive. So I want to honor that. And then in the midst of all of this, last time I met you, you were pregnant. And Owen, I just want to say his name, and as someone who's also experienced loss and grief, and knowing that so many people out there are experiencing loss and grief right now with COVID, how is it different for you, the grief versus I'm processing this memory and this awful thing that happened? Because I think we call them both trauma, we can say traumatic grief, but I think there's a big difference. I'm just curious how that's been for you.
Yeah. When you do the work and you come out the other side and you reprocess historical trauma, you experience neuroplasticity. Your brain changes, your nervous system changes, your neural pathways reorganize.
Yeah.
I guess that's how you'd say it. And you become new, truly. You carry in all the good qualities and all the great parts, but the protectors are settled, and your extreme behaviors and reactions to things are no longer extreme. So 3 months ago, I was 5.5 months pregnant. And the last time I saw you, I was with that child. And it took me a year to do IVF to get to this perfect embryo. And I'd one. And we just kept saying, all you need is one, all you need is one. And sadly, the baby he was still alive, but he wasn't getting what he needed from me. And so I had to let him go. And what I realized really quickly in that process, I'm still living it now in the grief process, is how fucking resilient I am now. And how aware I am of my parts. I noticed in the early days, my friends would be like, why are you seem so good? A few days in or a few days after the surgery, they'd be like, are you sure you're really feeling everything? And I'm like, no, I'm not. My dissociation part is right here, front first responder, and she's doing a fabulous job.
Yep.
And she's going to be here until later tonight when I lose my mind in my bed, and then she'll show back up again in 30 minutes. And then she'll be back tomorrow so I can, be there for my 3-year-old. And most importantly, be there for myself, because if I had just like sat in that and let that all flood in, it would have been too overwhelming to my system. So that's when those protector parts, when they're not extreme, have extraordinarily valuable roles. And so I let the dissociative part just show up when she needed to, and I let the grief come in when she needed to, and I let the the part of me that wanted to control my body a little bit come in when she needed to, get into shape and get my body back, because it is a little bit of a nightmare when you are 5.5 months pregnant and you've gained all this weight and you're in a pregnant body and your fucking milk comes in.
Oh,
That was the most heartbreaking.
yeah.
Comes in, and I produce a lot of milk, and that's a gift. And I thought for a minute, I was like, should I just pump this so I can give it to my son? I might have wanted to. I should have probably, but yeah. So I think that we have these moments in life where we can experience something traumatic, and if we've done a lot of work on ourselves, we can go through it and be able to look at our situation and say, wow,
Yep.
this is what I've been training for,
And say, thank you, protector parts. Thank you, managers. You're helping me get through this. I mean, it stands out to me how functional all of this is. And we still use so much deficit language around mental health. I mean, even when we say mental health, we think about problems, but
Yeah.
it's health, right? And this isn't dysfunction. This isn't a problem. This isn't I mean, you could go through and say, oh, let's diagnose and categorize, but that's just based on the way the DSM is created and the way we've come to understand these things. But what stands out to me so much in your book and the way you're describing this is like, this is functional. This
Yeah.
is helping us survive and maintain and build relationships and be some level of okay. But what it means to have happy days is to have more of a level of okay, more of a settling in your body, more of a
Right.
knowing of yourself, right? Like, this is who I am. This is what I do. I'm doing it today. It's
I
okay.
Yeah.
It's all
And I
right.
can have compassion towards it. And that's why I think internal family systems just blows my mind and has changed my life, because my relationship to self, that curious, compassionate, courageous part, can look at the dissociation in that moment and say, oh, okay, there you are. And I have so much compassion for you because this is the best that you can do right now. And thank you. And let me know what you need. And,
Yeah.
oh, okay, you need to do that right now. And we'll let that, and we'll check on you. You need to be checked on.
Yeah.
And that's literally the way I was communicating to myself. I was noticing that part and saying, thank you. Okay, this is what you're showing up right now, but you don't have to be extreme. Like, you don't have to run with my whole system and never let me back. Right. Instead, you can do your thing right now and then let me know when you need a break, and we
Yeah.
can go. Right.
Yeah.
And it's just such a gentle experience to be able to relate to yourself with compassion and courage and just a sense of connection. It's game changing.
And understanding, right? I mean, so much I feel like when people just learn about, oh, this is how trauma works, this is what happens, it's actually pretty normal. They go, oh, okay, so this is what's happening. And then you don't have to resist it or manage that. You just,
That's actually one of the big goals of the book, is like
yes.
normalizing the trauma, right? We've all got trauma. We're all traumatized in some way. And it's, the word trauma, even like I'm doing all these broadcast national television shows that will remain nameless, but talking to the producers, they're like, okay, we can say trauma, but let's just talk about like, when the boss yells at you at work. It's like, no, there's so much fear around going into the deeper parts because there's so much shame around it. And this book is just designed to really give the reader the full-bodied permission to acknowledge and honor and respect their history and the moments when they split off
Yep.
from their love connection, their self connection. And it's interesting in IFS, it's like, these fragmented parts. I always believe that we had, and from a spiritual perspective, that we had all these ego-based belief systems that we built up about ourselves. And when we noticed them and became compassionate towards them, we could offer them up to our higher power for healing. And I just, the same as IFS, and I'm grateful that I can be a spiritual voice box for Dick Schwartz because, this in the clinical space, there's a lot of like boundaries in language and expectations. And thank God I'm not a therapist because yet, I mean, maybe one day I will be, but um, that I'm not a therapist and I don't have credentials like that right now because it allows me to just be so fluid with my interpretation of all of these incredible practices. And every therapeutic practice that I put in this book is a spiritual practice.
Yeah.
Somatic experiencing, EMDR, IFS, EFT, and in my case, it's emotional freedom technique, the tapping technique. And it's all their spirit in all of that.
Absolutely. You spoke earlier to spiritual bypass, right? And I think I'm a big part of the yoga community. I've seen that happen a lot in the yoga community. I've also seen people speak to it a little bit more. Sometimes in spiritual speak, we say like, raise your vibration, right? This is low vibe, this is high vibe. And I see people struggle sometimes with the material that comes up around trauma, the emotional material. It's, especially the heavy nervous system states and the sadness and the anger and those things. And that's why I love the rage on the page, right? It's like, honor it, get it out, better out than in, put it on the page, not on a person, like directs it in this healthy way. But I wonder from your perspective, being so steeped in all these spiritual traditions, and kind of sharing your own process along the way, how do you reconcile that of, you know, raising your vibration and honoring these things that some people might call that like, oh, well, I don't want to be in a low vibe state. I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be
Yeah.
sad.
Yeah. That's actually one of the big responses I got from people about rage on the page. I put it in like a meditation challenge that I did. And I got a lot of people saying like, I don't want to do this, and I was like, okay, well, first of all, this isn't the right practice for this challenge, but, and I really do want to acknowledge that rage is a very impermissible feeling that many people are not ready to face unless it's, lots of work to get there. So I actually really highlight that in the book. But I think that the idea of going into the places that scare you isn't something that you would do all at once. You
Mhm.
would titrate slowly in and out, right? So you have like, even just from a spiritual perspective, like you might do that yoga class and then you're in Shavasana and you have that moment of like full blown catharsis and you feel it all the way through. And then you get off your mat and you get back to life, right? So it's like no human should be blown out with all of that emotion at one time, because frankly what happens is we go into full-blown dissociation and identity disorder, and I think that's just an extreme form of who we are in general. That's what Dick would say. It's like all these different protectors are different personalities really, but it gets so extreme if it was all hitting at once. And
Mhm.
so I really want the reader here to pace themselves and give themselves I say over and over that go get a therapist, or here's resources for a therapist. Or I say, if this practice doesn't seem safe for you right now, do not do it.
Yes.
Go to the next chapter, go back to chapter 5 and do the breath work. Like, don't. And this is also 42 years it took me to write this book. I'm joking around, but it's really, those are decades of practice. And so it's my journey, and someone's going to read it and say, oh, okay, you know what really feels resonant for me right now is the body work. I'm going to go look into somatic experiencing. Or I love the idea of that, the practices that she shares in the book, because those are safe for me to do right now. So I think it's really important to just make sure that whoever you are, wherever you are on your journey, you're not just diving headfirst into it, because that'll be too much.
And what I appreciate about what you're saying is that these harder feelings are important. They're important to pace through. There's, in my mind, and I think you're saying this too, there's not a judgment on them as being, one vibration or another. They're just emotions based on experiences that are moving through. And if we can contain that perspective and bite off a piece and chew it and do a little bit at a time, then we don't have to be governed by it, right? Like you said earlier, you don't get sort of hijacked and have this life of, something someone might call feeling toxic or feeling a certain way all the time. You can actually connect with the self that's beyond that or
Mhm.
different from that, and use that as more of a manager, right? You can
Yeah.
connect with that deeper self.
And that's why we go to therapy. It's like you go to that therapy session once a week, you open up, you crack open, you do some processing in whatever form of therapy you do. And then you have another week to really process, to let your body catch up. You can often be tired after the session,
Yep.
just like fully let it integrate. And then you go into the next session and it's a process of growth. And I think that, a lot of the folks that are like, I don't want to feel those feelings, they may have the spiritual beliefs like, oh, I have to only feel good to manifest. And yes, I believe that the secret to manifesting is feeling good, but not faking feeling good.
Yes. Yes. That's it right there.
Doing the work that it takes to get back to a safety within your system so
I
that you
so appreciate you clarifying that. I think that's a really important take home point for people. It's about doing the work to connect with that and feel good, not faking it, not
I
denying it.
in the intro of this book, I'm like, this may not seem like the 8 spiritual books that came before it, but it's my most spiritual book of all. And it's the spiritual foundation that got me to where I am. But also, if you want to manifest, practice freaking happy days, like, and then go do super attractor. Like that would be the order, because we need to really, really go underneath and rejigger some stuff under the hood in
Definitely.
order to let the car drive, so
Yeah.
that's
And have support, right? So you were talking about your spiritual practice being all of these healing tools, right? But I'm curious how your more specific spiritual practice, your meditation practice, for example, how did that change throughout this process? Like you recover memories at 36. It's been a chunk of years since then. What have you noticed shift for you in your meditation practice or in some of your other spiritual practices?
prior to remembering. I was really, really into Kundalini yoga, and it really served me greatly at that
Mhm.
time. It was a way of getting above the feelings and the disturbances. And in many ways, it was moving the stagnant energy out of my body. And it was allowing me to feel great spiritual connection. Because in those moments when you release so much in that moment, you can really listen to spirit. And I really believe I'll go down saying that I believe that technology worked for me and has worked for many people, but I will not get behind where it came from the leader that brought it here. I just can't, because
Yeah.
it's that is that guru was not a good dude.
Yep.
And that's the truth. And it was a truth I was unaware of. And it was heartbreaking for me.
Yeah.
That's why I wrote a book called You Are the Guru. Do not make anyone your guru. And if
Yes.
you're
And it's
somebody,
happened in other lineages too. I think a lot of people in the yoga world are struggling with letting
yeah,
go of that.
this was the second time that it happened to me with a different path I'd followed. And so just, but spirit, but that spiritual practice of Kundalini yoga really brought me for many years above it. And that was what I needed at the time, because that's all I could do at the time.
Mhm.
And then when I got to the place of remembering, I started doing more somatic kind of meditation practices like EFT meditation,
Yeah.
tapping meditations. And then I went into the most recently in 2020, I started doing the Rage on the Page that I write about. And that became my primary meditation, because it's the way that I'm able to give voice to the impermissible and then reprocess it through the meditation. But the one meditation practice that's been by my side for almost 2 decades, that has been extraordinary for me. And I just did it before when I called you and said, "Hey, I need an extra 20 minutes in my day. We have to go a little shorter," because I was burning out. This
Yeah.
is my 5th interview today, and I have another one after you.
Oh,
Tremendous privilege. So freaking grateful for you guys. But I had to say, I can't do a full hour. I got it for, because I needed that 20-minute meditation, and I'm going to need it again. So that meditation I'm referencing is TM, transcendental meditation. That for me has been just a through line. So there may have been many other meditation practices that have woven in and out, but that one is the one that I stick to and am steady with the
yeah.
whole way.
Yeah. So it's evolved over time, and the way that you understand that the teachers has evolved. And I'm sorry because you've been hurt by the teachers. And I know so many people who also have, and that's a lot of people are doing trying to figure out what to keep and what to let go
Yes.
in these lineages. And there's something really valuable there. And so I appreciate you bringing that forward, and acknowledging the harm at the same time and letting that piece.
Yeah. I'll always be very grateful for the technology and the practice. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know we've got to wrap up soon. Just a couple more questions. One thing that's come up I've seen with a lot of survivors of early childhood trauma in the spiritual community is this lesson you may have heard of, like, you can only attract eh, something if you're the same vibration as it. So how
Mhm.
do if someone's 3 and they're physically or sexually abused,
Mhm.
and then they turn 30 and decide to start doing some work, and then they hear that message. I've heard a lot of people struggle with that, especially when you are looking at a really innocent young child who just was born into a maybe toxic situation or
Mhm.
unhealthy relationships. Do you have any thoughts about that on a spiritual level, of like people who are really trying to understand, why did this happen to me in a spiritual perspective? Is that something?
Yeah, I think there's 2 questions in that. So one is, why did this happen to me? And the other question is, am I am I stuck attracting what I've experienced? And so the attracting question is, yes, we attract our likeness, but if you're working on yourself and you are opening up your awareness of those energetic disturbances, you are absolutely adjusting your point of attraction,
Mhm.
because you're going to be aware, oh, okay, my anxious attachment style is attracting an avoidant attachment style now, or you're going to see it in real time. And so really don't let yourself be like, oh, I'm going to just keep attracting the same shit. I always say, if you don't show up for what's up, it'll keep showing up. So yeah, you're gonna I lived for many many years attracting the same kind of people, but as I got healthier and healthier, the people in my life were healthier,
Yeah.
and my expectations of the people in my life became more boundaried and clear. And so don't worry about that. If you're doing the work, that's all that matters. If you're willing to go to the places that scare you and do the work to come out the other side, then you're going to already begin to shift your point of attraction about others.
I appreciate that, because there's no shame or blame. It's not like you made it happen or it's your fault. It's just, hey, that's what happened. There's all kinds of things happening in the world that we showed up to.
What happened? This is how you've been reacting to it. Let's work on those. Let's work on settling the reactivity, and then take it further and settle the child that needed to be settled then,
Yeah,
and bring
exactly.
him or her back to safety. And but in the process and the journey along the way, there's so many growth moments that how could you not be vibrating differently every single time you have a growth moment? People would say, like, how do I live a miraculous life? Well, just add up the miracles.
Yeah.
Each miracle moment adds up and adds up and adds up, and then you're free. You become really truly free. It doesn't mean you don't still have shit to do and more miracles to perform, but you become more and more free.
And what I've seen and experienced is, as you heal that trauma, you see the miracles that were already there, that maybe the trauma and the memory of it was so big, you weren't aware. Right. So I've seen a lot of people go, oh, now I can actually appreciate there was someone there to help me, or there was something I forgot about that because the pain was so strong.
Mhm.
What made you aware you were ready to write this book?
Yeah. Uh, I always say, write my books for myself first. So I knew I was ready to write this book when I became safe enough in my nervous system.
Mm.
And when I felt that I'd gone to the depths, when I had retrieved the child, the inner child. And that doesn't mean that I don't have more to do. I go to therapy every single week,
Yep.
and sometimes more than once a week. I practice what I preach every single day. And even in my continuing education, it's practicing it for myself first. And so I really knew in the beginning of, I had to really know I was ready to write the book to sell it, right? So I
Yeah.
sold it maybe after I might have sold it right after the pandemic hit, just around that. Yeah, I sold it in like March or April of 2020. And then I started writing it
Yeah.
2020. So I knew then that my system was safe enough, that the shame that there wasn't shame driving it, and that there was a story of freedom to share.
Yeah, absolutely. My last question is, there's so many people suffering in the world. And I wanted to ask if there's a mantra or a prayer or something you'd suggest. And I just feel like get the book, like it's all in here.
My prayer truly is that I'm going to say this prayer really, really, just putting it out there, so much energy, so much conviction, that my prayer is that to all the souls who are ready to begin the process of gently and safely touching into and healing the wounds from their past, I pray for you to find this book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And thank you for writing it, Gabby, and for sharing your journey with us so eloquently. And I know day to day, week to week, therapy session to therapy session, it's messy, right? And it's such a gift to be able to have a through line of somewhere you can go and say, okay, well, what do I try now? And what do I try now? And where do I go next? Because we all know now that healing isn't linear, but still, it's like, what do I do? Where do I go? What's next? And how do I get some support on the way through this? And so I just really appreciate that you've been very honest and vulnerable and shared this with, so many people. And I know it'll touch a million people's hearts and souls, and they'll share it with their friends, and it'll really ignite a conversation around trauma and dissociation, which I'm super excited about, because
Yeah.
I've heard so many people talk about trauma and they don't get that part.
Yeah.
So I just see this really shifting how we see ourselves and how we see the impacts of trauma, and normalizing it, and just supporting a lot of people. So thank you so much.
Thank you so very much. It's really fun to talk to you in particular, because you're so close to this and familiar with it all.
Thanks so much for listening. My hope is that you walk away from these episodes feeling supported, and like you have a place to come to find the hope and inspiration you need to take your next small step forward. I do want to make sure it's clear that this podcast isn't offering any prescriptions. It's not advice or any kind of diagnosis. Your decisions are in your hands, and we encourage you to consult with any relevant healthcare professionals you may need to support you through your unique path of healing. For more information and resources, please visit my website, howwecanheal.com. There, you'll find tons of helpful resources and the full transcript of each show. You can also click the podcast menu to submit requests for upcoming topics and guests. Before we wrap, I want to send thanks to our guests today, to Christine O'Donnell and Celine Baumgartner of Brightsided Podcasting, and to everyone who helped support this podcast, directly and indirectly. Alex, thanks for taking the dogs out while I record. I'd also like to give a shout out to my brother, Matt. He passed away in 2002. He wrote this music and recorded it, and it makes my heart so happy to share it with you now.